There we are. Welcome to the listening. Dr. Joseph Riggio, as I should call you, that being your correct title. How are you, sir?
I'm good. I'm good. It's always actually, it's one of those pretentious things, if you will, when you're introduced somewhere or somebody's introducing this is Joseph. Oh, nice to meet you, Mr. Riggio, or nice to meet you, Mr. Joseph. And it's how do you non-pretentiously say it's really doctor?
Yeah. Well, that's one of the challenges of having that, I guess, in your history. But
Yeah,
yeah,
so
how
thank
do
you
you deal with
acknowledging it, but we can just probably go with Joe or Joseph always.
Yeah, yeah. So tell us where you are today.
You are looking out behind me into the trees across the street in Sarasota, Florida. And I am sitting about, oh gosh, I would say 10 minutes by car, 15 minutes by bike to the beach. So very close to the Gulf of Mexico
Wow.
and the water there.
And so you were saying to me before that you're actually on the west side of Florida, because we all think of Florida at the bottom, and maybe most people think of the Atlantic side, but
Right.
obviously there's a whole other side. I don't know anything about that
Yeah.
geographically, or
I
is it
mean, a lot of people,
similar, or?
when you think of Florida, especially internationals, of course, think of, the beaches of Florida. Most people have a sense that there are these beaches in Florida, and they do think of the East Coast beaches, Fort Lauderdale and that kind of thing. And they're beautiful beaches. They're on the Atlantic Ocean. And then the other place that people think of in Florida is likely to be Orlando, where Disneyland is, or Disney World. I always get those two confused. So there's that big tourist attraction in Universal Studios across the street and all that stuff. But the reality is that there is another coast of Florida, and it's I'm going to call it the third coast, and I'll explain what I mean by that in a minute. There's the first coast is the East Coast, then there's the West Coast, which is where I am, and it's on the Gulf of Mexico. So it's not in the Atlantic proper; it's in the Gulf that is formed between Florida and Mexico. So that is a kind of an interesting place. The water properties are very different, much more shallow, much warmer, much less wavy, very different kind of experience. And the second coast that I was leaving out is down in the Keys, which is that point, that goes down towards the Caribbean. And that's a whole nother world, whole different experience itself. Some places in the Keys you could pretty much with two or three strides step from the West Coast to the East Coast of Florida. That's how
Right,
narrow it is.
right.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Wow. Yeah,
Right.
that must be an interesting place where the two areas of water meet as well, where you've
Mhm.
got that whole Atlantic meeting the Gulf.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And the Gulf, of course, is actually part of the Atlantic Ocean. It opens up fully to the Atlantic Ocean in a very significant way. But it is protected by these land masses, so it tends to be a bit different. Unfortunately, for the people who are west of us, which is the coast of Mexico, but especially the folks out in uh, Louisiana, New Orleans, and Texas, the Gulf is warm. So when the hurricanes actually make it across the state of Florida, they pick up some energy coming off that warm water, and the folks out there tend to get hit a little harder.
All right.
So it's an interesting thing. You want to talk a bit about the chaos in the world today. And we can look at this chaos is part of the world. It's always been part of the world. It's never not been part of the world. And in some ways, I would argue that, as a species, I think we're becoming too conditioned to the lack of chaos or chaos being gone and the expectation that things should be calm and cool and collected. When the reality of history tells us we live on a somewhat violent planet that has its moments of expression. And that violence, you could say, those moments of expression exist in human experience as well in the social form, right? So it's just the macrocosm and the microcosm constantly playing, As we speak, Tim, I'm guessing there's a star exploding somewhere.
Yeah. Sure enough, there is. Yeah, it's interesting that you bring up the hurricanes, because it just makes me think. I remember going to Italy, must have been 20 years ago, and we were staying in Rome, and then we were staying with a guy who his mother lived there. He was Italian but living in London, and he was from Napoli. So we went down to Naples, Napoli, and we stayed with some of his family members. But the first couple of days we got there, it was really misty, and where his family were, they were on the north side of the city, so it's kind of like in a valley, the city right on the coast, and they were on the north side, sort of quite high up. And I remember on the morning of the third day, the mist cleared, and there was Vesuvius. And it was fucking amazing to see how big and how close it was. And I completely understood why the people were the way they were. Because you're living next to this thing that at any second can just wipe you out. And it's completely shaped the entire culture of the city. And I wonder in the same way if, because Miami has got, or not Miami, I say Miami, Florida's got a reputation for being a bit crazy, at least on this side of the Atlantic. And from what I've heard from other Americans, them too, like a little bit kind of crazy and mad and edgy. And I wonder if it's shaped by the same sort of forces, those, you know, the fact that hurricanes are coming through all the time, and you've got to kind of like be able to sort of deal with chaos living somewhere like that, because it can happen at any moment.
Right. Yeah. I think it's there's a thing that's interesting, you know, when you talk about this kind of chaos, right? There's the suddenness and the true unexpectedness of a volcanic explosion. Like when they happen, they just happen, they're there, right? And I think if you want to look at a place, of course, which has come to terms with that over and over and over again, there's probably two places I can think of really quickly on the top of my head. And that is Hawaii, the Hawaiian Islands. Because the volcanoes there are just, you know, active, and people are aware of it, especially on the big island of Hawaii itself, right? The other islands are older volcanic islands, or volcanic expressions, we could say. And some of them were purely underseas expressions, so they never had the rising of the volcanic mass that you see in the Big Island. But the Big Island's active, and people, you know, they build cities and lose them, or towns at least, and lose them to a volcanic explosion. You know, people adapt and move on. And then you also go out to Iceland, and it's the same thing. You know, the Iceland volcanoes, and there's multiples of them, are constantly active, and they are quite dramatic in some ways. And you go down towards the town of Reykjavik, which I love, one of my favorite cities in the world, actually. And you drive through the volcanic fields where that volcanic activity is still fresh enough that you're walking on basically glass, you know, cracked glass that has been formed. So that's one kind of explosion, if you want to call it that, right? The other kind is the hurricane, which is a bit different. And the hurricane, I think, has a different experience to it, which is there's warning, it's coming. Yeah, and it takes time. It doesn't just appear, it's getting to you, and you're tracking it. You know when it's coming. And even I'm going to guess in the old days, the old timers probably knew that the weather changes, the sky felt different, the moisture levels, the wind levels. They knew it before it happened. It didn't just show up and was there. And it builds. So, you know, you get a little bit of wind and a little bit of rain, and a lot more wind and a lot more rain. And finally you're being whipped around, and, you know, in some cases roofs are being torn off and cars are being thrown around. It's pretty intense in some, you know, hurricanes, not all, but some. And so it's a different kind of thing, because it also lasts for a while. It can go on for a couple of days. And now you've got to be present to this thing that you know is going to pass. So you're not looking to evacuate and be gone forever, as you would with a volcano that's going to cover your house in lava flow and ash, but you are going to have to protect yourself and maybe evacuate and then come back and deal with the damage that's been, you know, wrought. So there's a different mentality that builds. It's this adaptability. You know, I've got to go with the flow. You know, this is going to happen, and it's not completely unexpected. It's never completely known. You don't know if in this year there's going to be a big one or not. And there isn't every year, obviously. So you move with it, and you let it kind of inform you, as opposed to completely shape your life. Right? And I think that's different, you know, in some ways. It shapes your life in in a bigger, more expansive way, in the sense that it's this through time experience. I also know some people who live in the Midwest of the United States, which is, you know, what they call Tornado Alley. And tornadoes are very different. They come up very suddenly. You don't know when they're going to land. They are incredibly devastating, and you cannot be present to them in any way. A hurricane, you can sit out if you're in a secure building and probably survive and, you know, make it through the next day or two or three. If you're in a building where a tornado hits, you're not going to survive if that building is torn asunder by those winds. So it's a completely different.
I didn't know that. So they're much more intense tornadoes.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah,
Right.
yeah. If you ever, you know, if you just, you know, do the YouTube thing, I guess, and go look at, you know, a tornado aftermath, and what you see is splinters. There is no house. I mean, it's not there, right? Wildly different. It's as devastating as a wildfire. You
So
know,
what makes them different? Is it just the way they're formed? So what is the difference between
hurricanes
hurricane and tornado?
are winds that circle around a calm center, and they spread over many miles. So you're probably looking at a hurricane that is, you know, 3 to 5 or even, you know, 10, 15 miles across, depending on the
Okay.
hurricane. And the wind speeds are quite intense. You're looking at wind speeds of probably 90 to 120 miles an hour. Right? A hurricane is very different in the sense from a tornado, in that a tornado is much more small located. So
So
the
it's more
size of
just
a
a
tornado, a
point.
big tornado, a huge tornado, the biggest tornadoes ever, you know, these tornadoes that are incredibly big, or a mile across. I mean, that's a tornado that would terrify the most, you know, hardened tornado, you know, watcher. Um, but the average tornado is got a footprint maybe of a couple of 100 yards across, not a couple of hundred. And the winds can be 300 miles plus. So you're talking about 3 to 5 times the wind speeds of hurricanes, right?
So
Very
they don't have that calm center that the hurricane has. The hurricane's
They
like a
have a
ring.
center, but it's way up at the top. So it's a funnel.
Okay.
At
Okay.
the base where it hits the ground, there's no center. There's just whipping winds of 300 miles an hour that literally eats the ground. It
Yeah.
takes this up into the funnel and throws it around. And the funnel, because it's spread, takes this stuff from where it is and spreads it out and throws it all over, including your body, right? So that would not be healthy. Um, Very different experience. You know, I would say the difference is being in a bowl where somebody is mixing some eggs with a whisk and somebody dropping you into a blender.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. 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 Well, I didn't know that. That's fascinating. But I totally. I mean, I knew it when you start describing it. I can see the tornadoes. I've seen images of them, and they
right.
are much smaller. Whereas I guess when I've seen hurricanes, it's more of a general. Yeah, and I
Very
know,
different.
you know, and I definitely knew about the sort of the calmness of the winds in the center. You know, I often wondered what it might be like to kind of track it by trying to stay in the middle and sort of moving around, you know, whilst a hurricane was going on. Because don't they also travel quite slowly, hurricanes? Am I
Yes.
right in
That's what
thinking
I'm
that?
saying. They can last 2, 3 days in an area.
Yeah, yeah.
So you wind up getting the front edge of the hurricane. And then the center comes through what they call the eye of the hurricane, which is the calm part, right? And then the trailing edge of the hurricane is going to hit you again. So you get hit twice,
Yeah.
no matter what. The advantage, if you want to call it that, I don't know if that's the right word, is that by the time the trailing edge gets you, it may be much calmer. It may have slowed down dramatically. So if you can think of the difference, just because we're talking about it, a tornado is a vortex, and a hurricane is a centrifugal force. So you
Okay.
got the hurricane whipping around this calm center in a circular pattern. It's like a donut moving over you. The tornado is like a vortex that comes down and just moves and, you know, strips the land. You know, much more intense activity.
So
So
so that kind of
these
brings
things,
up this thing of
the point being, let me interrupt you for a second. The
yeah, yeah.
point being, these things shape us. The context, the environments, the world we live in shape us. And one of the challenges, I think, that all modern man, you know, I don't know, you pick a moment in time, we can argue about it, but all modernity has moved away from the realization that we are contained by these natural forces in the natural world, and we have sought instead to try to contain them and shape them instead of allowing them to shape us. So that's my big comment for the day. Maybe that's the heading.
Yeah. I mean that, and that's kind of what we've seen in this. It's certainly in my lifetime in this kind of rising health and safety culture, where it's like it's trying to kind of suppress life almost by making everything harmless. But ultimately it does. It's not trying to do suppress life, but that seems to be what it does. It kind of smothers everything to a point of almost killing it. That's how it feels. And when you're talking about being somewhere where there is this massive potential for disruption, I wonder if that isn't a really healthy environment to live in, because it does keep you in that state of like having to be ready for things, accepting that you can't control everything, being open to a bit of chaos, and maybe even in, mixing it into your personal culture, because that seems like a really healthy balance to me. Because obviously, as people, we want some stability so we can build our lives for our families and what have you. But this kind of openness to the chaos in life, to me, that's where all the creativity comes from as well. If you close the door to chaos, you're killing life. You're taking all the joy out of life in a way, because it's those surprises that can be bad, that can be painful, can be catastrophic, but they can also bring new rich things into your life that you never would have known about. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Absolutely. So these are the things, that I think become interesting. In fact, I got a theme that I'm playing with these days, Tim. And the theme it's been there a long time. I can remember the first time I was really cognizant of it in a visceral way in my body, my being, was, gosh, let's call it 20 years ago, at least 15. I don't remember the exact date, but it was quite some time ago. I remember where I was living, and I remember what I was doing and how I became cognizant of it. And it's been a theme that's been threading through my life in waves. So it peaks and it depresses and it peaks. And I think I'm more or less in a peak moment now, coming back to it in a newer, more fully realized way. And the theme that I'm referring to here is trust. So I think we're talking about that at some level. It's, Einstein's famous quote, the fundamental question everyone must answer is, do we live in a malevolent or a benevolent universe? And everything that you experience in your life is predicated on the answer to that question. If you think the universe is out to get you and you have to protect yourself from it, and there's just danger around every corner, every decision you make is driven, if you will, by the idea of avoiding malevolence or dealing with the fact that it is malevolent, right? And the second possibility is you think of the universe as benevolent. And therefore, every decision you make is predicated on the idea that there's something here that can and will, and if I open myself to, is beneficial to me, will help me, right? And then you begin to look for the opportunities to be present to what is it that is good and benevolent and healthful, right? So I think this is really speaking directly to this concept of trust. And I think we see, this concept, if you want to call it that, showing up in all of the world's perennial spiritual traditions or mystical traditions. And the fundamental trust is, can I trust this universe? Can I trust that I will be okay in some form or way? And then I can allow myself to surrender. And I think this idea of surrender is very much attached to this idea of trust. And, I see it, and I've seen it for years, and I have, a number of people that I work with. A lot of the work that I do, a lot of the clients that I work with are not answering this question. They're not even asking the question, can I, will I, am I able to surrender? Am I interested in surrender? And so they're living in conflict all the time in their relationships. So they won't surrender to their parents. They won't surrender to their children. They won't surrender to their spouses. They won't surrender to their business partners or their clients or their suppliers or whomever it is that they're engaging with. They won't surrender to the barista at the local coffee shop, to allow these others to take them on and be with them, right? So, I mean, it's like you walk into the coffee shop and it's not just ordering a coffee the way you want it. I want a double shot espresso, extra hot, whatever, right? It's not that. It's that you're telling the barista how to do it.
Mm.
You know, make my coffee a double shot extra hot, as though you can't possibly trust that they will be able to do it, you know? And it's really interesting how easy the world begins to change for you. I happen to like meat. I'm a beef eater. I like steak, and I go out often. I like to eat out. It's one of my grand pleasures. In fact, I've put on my bucket list, one of my desires is to end my days going to the top 10 restaurants by the top 10 chefs in the world every year until I die. That's one of my bucket list items, right? To get to the point where I can afford to do that and have the time and leisure to do it. But being a foodie of sorts and loving this food, and especially just really a very fine piece of beef that's been raised well and cooked well and cared for and presented well, you go to a restaurant that does that or claims to do that, and they'll say, "How would you like your steak, sir?" And my answer these days is almost always, as the chef decides. Mm-hmm. Right? If I'm going to a fine restaurant, I have to trust that the chef knows the material, knows who he's working with.
Yeah.
You know, it would be like going to a fine painter, whether you're talking about, you know, Michelangelo or Jason Pollock, and saying, "I want to commission a painting, and here's what I'd like you to do." Mm. And of course, Michelangelo had to live under those terms and was still found ways to be creative and expressive. Jason Pollock, a little less so. He was more, his own creativity and expression was allowed to be present, if you will. But I think when you're dealing in the world, surrendering means you've opened yourself to art. It means you've opened yourself to the aesthetic. And now the sensuality of the world becomes available to you. And I think if I had to point to one singular thing, our ability as human beings to experience the world sensorially through our senses and be experiencing ourselves as sensual is the most magnificent aspect of what it is to be human. And especially if we can do that with others. To be sensual in the presence of others and to experience their sensuality. What a fucking gift.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm totally with you on that one. Yeah, so much in that, Joseph, so much in that. And is your personal, I mean, I think I know the answer, but is your personal experience of the universe that it is a benevolent one and one that you want to trust will bring you more riches if you come from that open place?
My answer is that my, basic fundamental, position is that the universe is benevolent, except when I stub my toe at night using the bathroom. Then it's
yeah, yeah. Has its moments, right? Has its moments for sure. I think it's funny because the deepest part of me has always felt exactly that it is benevolent. But my particular conditioning and my particular life journey and the cards that I was dealt at the start put me in the other place of not trusting the world at all. And but there was always, and so on my journey of kind of coming to terms with that, there's always been, beyond my immediate experience and the sort of struggle of dealing with that and coming to terms with that and even understanding it, there's always been this sense, almost like a magnetic force pulling me forwards, that it is truly benevolent and that there is nothing to fear from the world in that sense, that the world is on my side. And sure enough, at the times when I've been brave enough to kind of take leaps, it's always been there to catch me and open something up that I could never have imagined. Always, every time I've done that, and I guess when you've done it once, you can trust that it might happen again. Once you've done that and taken a leap in your life for the first time, it kind of makes it a little bit easier the next time. But yeah, and I don't really understand why I knew or how or in what form I knew that it was benevolent. But when you talk about the sensual nature of the world, I'm beginning to think, oh, that's how I knew, because I could feel it in my body. And some of my earliest kind of blissful experiences were all about sensual experience, with sunlight I've got a wonderful, there's two wonderful experiences that are so vivid even today. One, I must have been I must have been 4 or younger, because it was from a house that we lived in when I was very small. And I have a memory of lying on this carpet, quite a coarse carpet, sort of mustard colour, but really quite threadbare. You could see the kind of manila coloured weave underneath it, and I could feel, that texture is really strong in my memory. And I'm just lay on the carpet in my bedroom, which was quite a small, what they call a box room, a tiny little room. And it's completely still, the air in the room. It's afternoon and the sun is shining through the window, and I'm warm and it's covering my entire body. And I'm like a cat, just luxuriating in the warmth and lying there, and there's nothing to do, and it's this incredible feeling of total contentment, and I'm there. And the next one is, I'm a bit older, I'm probably about 9 or 10, and I used to spend a lot of time on this golf course, which was, we were in a sort of suburban area by then, lots of streets, lots of houses, but there was this golf course which was full of kind of wild bits, semi-wild, obviously, the kind of rough and the trees in between the fairways. And I used to spend all of my time on that golf course. And I was like a wild animal, because the people using it, the golfers, had no idea I was there. I was, I knew where all their golf balls went when they lost them. And I used to live around those kind of the wilder bits of it. And I had another experience, just a similar one, where it's autumn. I'm lying in this kind of quite long, rough grass, very uneven ground, but it's kind of high, so it's hiding me. And there are birch trees nearby, and the leaves are just starting to turn. And the sun, again, it's that kind of yellow, maybe September in England, you get this wonderful yellow light of the sun. And it's just baking me in that same way. And I'm having a similar feeling.
Mm-hmm.
So I think those were the moments where my body was saying, you know what? It's good out there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah.
I think there's a whole bunch of stuff, as you said, it's rich, the descriptions you offer. And, there's a couple of things in addition to the sensual description, the nature of the sensuality of what you say. It's, you somehow found yourself able to give yourself the freedom to do nothing.
Mm.
And we are so driven and conditioned and programmed that if we're doing nothing, we're somehow failing. In the moment where we do nothing, we sit and there's nothing, or we're simply walking maybe to nowhere, right? We're just having the experience of being alive, and whatever we're doing, that somehow that's failure.
Mm.
We are, we're doing this in between the things that are really important that we have to get to. So we've taken time off. That's, the term we use. What is it? Just think of the language. I'm a language guy. So this idea, we've taken time off. We've taken off time. We've put time aside. We've shut time off, right? And there is no time now, because we have to get back to it. We have to get back to when we're now in time again and doing things which are really important, as opposed to this thing, which is this pure encapsulation of being human as this sensual beast, just simply experiencing ourselves in that deep, profound sensuality. And I think I haven't met anybody who doesn't have some moment where that kind of sensuality was available to them, but they reject it because they feel guilty because they've had it. Right? So that's the one thing that comes up for me as you say all that. The second thing is you mentioned that it might be interesting to talk about what you refer to as a Graves model and what I think of as developmental modeling. This idea that there are different ways, this is how I would speak of it, Tim. There are different ways to perceive the world, which contain various levels and perceptions that are organized in terms of values. Meaning, what am I going to put my attention on that's going to stand out for me about what it is that I hold as important in this perceptual experience, right? So if we go back to it, these models often feed off of two fundamental forms as I know them. And I'm not saying that this is the truth, it's a truth. And it's that, one of the folks who was looking at this was Piaget. and the way that he looked at the biological development of children and how they seem to express themselves in these incredibly common human ways as they went through these developmental periods. And they were contained to some extent at age ranges. So it wasn't like at 181 days, the child will do this. It was somewhere between this moment and this moment. It's typical of most children in most places in the world, in fact, to have these kinds of experiences about the world. Almost all children, and we're going to talk about healthy, well-organized children, because there are other situations that parents deal with in the world, bringing children into the world, but healthy, well-organized children in general discover their hands early on. So, you have the baby, and the only thing the baby knows is the sense of comfort, warmth or cold, and responding to that, and mewing or crying or whatever, and finding the nipple. That's about it. Other than that, there ain't nothing going on. Mm-hmm. And then at some point, you watch your children grow, and there's just like this utter fascination with their own hand. Like they've discovered their hand, and they've discovered that somehow they have volition. They can do shit, Mm-hmm. And then, of course, they have to taste it.
Yeah, the tasting thing is so important. It's a whole thing where they taste the world.
It develops.
Yeah.
It's early development.
Yeah.
The tongue and the mouth are developed early on in the brain structures. So that's how they know the world. And if you let them, they would taste things you don't want them to taste, the cat food lying on the floor that they crawl to, whatever it may be, right? So there's this developmental stuff, and that happens in children. We see this through Piaget, and he basically said it's biologically organized. You can't stop humans from developing. They will express in these ways, and then you can shape and nurture or repress the expression, but it's going to come. Most parents, without intending to or any maliciousness, do a lot of work to repress a lot of that. Mm-hmm. And I watch it in the adults I work with, and I can tell them, oh, you probably had this experience as a child. You came from this kind of house. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about your parents. I'm guessing your mom and dad were kind of like this, right? And I can see it in these adults that I meet with. I meet them at 50 and 60. Mm-hmm. And those impressions of repression are present, or those impressions of freedom and liberation are also present, right? And without what I'm going to call a healthy balance, the individual can't fit easily into what we call our social sphere. So that repression isn't inappropriate. It's the amount of repression and liberation that's offered and when, right? So I also see these adults that I meet and I go, oh, so you were like 3 years old and your parents expected you to take care of yourself, huh? They thought it was okay to let you do whatever you wanted and to, in fact, not guide you or even offer you input and help. So you were going to figure everything out from yourself in life from about the age of 3, right? And this creates issues, this extraordinary liberation without ever telling the child no. There's the idea of setting boundaries and limits for children to contain them within which they're capable of doing in that moment is extraordinarily powerfully useful to the child in its developmental growth. Mm-hmm. And we see parents who just refuse to acknowledge that their children should have any repression whatsoever. And not only are they socially obnoxious, but it thwarts their development into becoming fully who they're capable of being. Their creativity is getting stamped on because there's so much obligation and responsibility to act that they have no time to explore and to make mistakes, to fail successfully. Right? So these are just things that have fascinated me for years and years and years, Tim. And then I move into the idea of adult development. We can talk through all of the people you want to talk to, from Freud to Nietzsche to William Reich. I mean, there's a million people who looked at this idea of what does it look like to be a healthy, functioning adult, right? And I would argue that it's not so easy all the time to find one of those to observe, right? Because of all the stuff I talked about, as the child comes up. But we do see developmental levels. We see the idea that humans can experience a perceptual world of variations where they organize themselves into relations that are about what's important to them that they're exposing themselves to or are exposed to, including other human beings. This exchange we're having, for instance. What are we each paying attention to in one another? How are we paying attention to one another? Are we really present in any way to one another? Or are we having our own individual experiences in each other's company? Those are the kind of developmental questions one would ask. And I think, without going too much further, because I'm going to take a bit of a break from my monologue and turn it back to you a bit, But the things that we're seeing in the world now, we're having this conversation in 2021, January of 2021, the very end of January of 2021, after what feels to most of us, I'm sure, like a year of chaos from this thing we referred to as the worldwide pandemic of COVID-19, right? And it's been expressed in all kinds of ways throughout all kinds of cultures, from we're going to handle this well, we're going to approach it like adult human beings and be mature about what has to happen so that we can become free of the limitations of this harming people unnecessarily, to what I would call outright panic and useless and futile lockdowns of entire cultures, where really the vast majority of the people who are being locked down are really being punished because there is no significant risk to them in particular, and no willingness to do what it would take to protect those who are most vulnerable. So the most vulnerable still remain exposed, and the most, adaptable and the ones who could provide the most benefit to others are the most constrained. So we're still losing people at a horrifying rate to the disease, and we're losing other people now to a horrifying rate because they aren't able to get access to necessary services. The insanity of it is just so human that one is provoked to the laughter of the absurd.
Yeah, well, I totally hear you, and have a very, very similar feeling about it all. It does seem, and it relates to that health and safety mentality that seems to have kind of permeated our culture, certainly here in Britain. And the lack of adults and the lack of a sense of taking self-responsibility, even, just like what are the government going to do? Looking to government to take care of us, and of course government can't take care of us because it's got its own issues. It's deeply compromised by its relationship with power structures and corporations, and and so on.
Government doesn't exist.
Right.
It doesn't
Yeah.
exist.
No. Yeah. It's just that it's in name, but it's not. It's just
Right.
another
It's
branch.
people.
Yeah.
People doing stuff. It's not the government. There is no government. Government is a word.
Yeah. Yeah.
When you look at what government refers to, it points at, it's pointing at, see those people over there? We've tasked them with these things we allow them to do for us. And some of them think they now have the obligation to task us what we need to do for them. That's a definition of government.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what's interesting to me is to sort of see if there's a way to read or explain, or to, because it's so complex, but to kind of get into why we've responded. I mean, I'm saying I'm talking about the West in particular, because that's what I know. Obviously, I'm in Britain, you're in the States, and we're very, very influenced, obviously, by the States, and it's, we're kind of joined culturally now, and have been for a long time in a lot of ways. I mean, obviously there are differences, but yeah, to me it looked like we've just had a kind of, or we're in a pandemic of mental illness, and the virus is actually a very small part. That was like the trigger, the catalyst, but what I'm seeing is the expression of something that was building and building and building over years, in that there was a general sense of this whole way of life is terminal, and it's getting quicker. We're getting faster and faster on our journey towards going off the cliff, and nothing seems to be happening of any meaning apart from individuals realizing more and more that it's going on. And then something like the virus, to me it seemed like it just let all of this kind of anxiety and impotent rage and stress associated with being in a culture that's suicidal, it seemed like it all then suddenly could come out in some way. And our response, because government is not government, as you say, and is just kind of almost, well, it's corporate power interfacing with the legal system to kind of increase and perpetuate its power and profit making. And then a population that's basically domesticated like livestock, who are kind of an essential part of feeding these corporations. And then this virus comes along, and it just, everything just spins out then. It's like a big crack appears. And in a way, I mean, I'm kind of grateful that it's happened, because I feel like, and it's similar to Trump getting in America. It was like, oh, now something's going to happen because this has fucked things up, and they will never go back to what they were before. So even though it looks on the surface to be a terrible thing, to me, I saw a lot of positive in it, because it was like the spanner has finally gone into the machine and things are falling apart more quickly. So, I mean, what do you make of that as a kind of rambling interpretation?
I think the first thing I'd like to do is make this comment, which is always interesting, and this comes out of a called a linguistic tradition that I'm part of, right? And I first came in contact with it through the auspices of my training in neurolinguistic programming, NLP. And it was this idea of nominalizing, where you take a word that's an active word and turn it into a static word, a noun, a verb that becomes a noun. And so you have the government, when what we really should be referring to is those people who are governing. So they're taking action. And there is a word called a governor. And of course, we know that word as the person who is the highest authority of a particular domain, but it's also used as a mechanical reference. So you can have a governor in a car. And what does the governor do? The governor in a car limits. It's a limiting mechanical device. The governor is a limiting human device. The government is a limiting institutional device. It's designed to limit, not to expand, it's not supposed to be there to keep you safe. It's supposed to prevent or limit the exposure you have to danger. It doesn't keep you safe. They don't come in your home and wrap you in a blanket and make sure you're tucked in at night to bed. I mean, that's not what they're doing. That would keep you safe, right? They don't make sure the fire's lit in your fireplace, right? They try to do things which limit your exposure to the potential dangers. So they're limiting factors. And this is the first thing as humans we have to get is these structures we built. What are they designed to do? And at what level, let's go back to development, are they operating at? So one of the first massive social developmental theorists was Abraham Maslow. And Abraham Maslow recognized what he referred to as a hierarchy of needs, right? And what's the first thing in the hierarchy of needs? Safety. So we've devolved to the lowest level of Maslow's hierarchy when we seek to make sure the first and most essential absolute thing we have to do that the governing should provide us with is safety, right? What's the second thing that Maslow talks about? He talks about the idea of belonging and being part of a larger system. So what does government do? In order to keep us safe, it stops us from belonging. It stops us from having any interaction or connection with others because it recognizes we can't attend to level one. If we allow level two to go on, they may do something crazy like actually hug one another. Have that happening, right? And if they hug one another, we could get to level three, because at level three, what we look at is status and a position of having some voice that is unique and authentic. And if people are having voices that are unique and authentic, how do we control them as the mass? We cannot have this. So there's all these things that I see observing, and I look at it and I see Trump. I loved Trump being in office, despite the fact that I mostly despised the guy. And the reason I loved him being in office was because I saw him the same way you did, as a disruptor of the system, and looking at the system as totally corrupt. And I got so much flack, Tim, for some of the things I was saying and sharing and posting, because people were so uncomfortable in their cognitive dissonance with the fact that the system they'd become familiar with would be chained, that it and I use the word chained there, would be, disrupted in some way for them. I think of this old, teaching story, right? You take a baby elephant and you put a post in the ground very deep, and you put a heavy chain on its leg or a heavy, heavy rope on its leg, and make sure it's strong enough that the elephant can't pull the post out or get away from the shackle on its ankle, its leg, and pull itself away. So now it's tied to a position, and it keeps tugging against it, and it fights against it. And eventually it realizes it can't win. This is actually something that a brilliant psychologist, Martin Siegelman, research called learned hopelessness. So he did a horrible experiment, and it probably would never be allowed again, but at the time it was allowed. He had a pen in which there were two sides of a metal plate, and they could be electrified. And he would put these dogs in the pen, and he would electrify one side of the plate. And if the dog stepped on it, of course, they got a shock. It wasn't a killer shock, but it was very uncomfortable. And they would jump to the other side where they'd be relieved. Then he'd electrify that side, and they'd jump back to the other side, and they'd be relieved. Then he began to electrify both sides, so there was nowhere they could go to get relieved. And what happened was, even when the other side was now shut off, the electrified side was not something that would deter the dogs from staying there and remain in their discomfort. They had learned to be hopeless. Now, he found, and this is the important part, his book is actually called Learned Optimism, that he could reverse that experience and retrain the dogs to be optimistic where they would seek relief. Mm. Well, we are in a state of experience by those who are governing that puts us into a state of learned hopelessness. Mm. No matter what it seems we do, we're going to continue to fail. And by failing, we're going to continue to be punished. So why bother? And we begin to give in more and more and more. So the elephant eventually learns not to pull at the stake, not to pull. If it's got a shackle on and the shackle is tied to anything, it will not pull. Now you have this full-grown elephant who could easily pull even the original post and heavy chain out of the ground, no problem at all, who needs to have simply a simple post put into the ground and a light rope, as long as it's attached to that shackle, will not pull on it. Mm. As soon as it feels a tug, gives up resisting. And this is what I see happening to many, many people, unfortunately. And what I saw happening when I was discussing these things about disrupting the system, because the cognitive dissonance that things might chain meant that I was pulling against their chain that they had learned to give up resisting, that they had learned was in their best interest to allow. So I listened to people who wanted to vote for Biden. I paid a lot of attention to these conversations that were happening, not so much in the media, not so much in the pundits, not so much in the news articles, but in people I was meeting on the street, people I was having conversations with, and people I was exchanging information with. And many, many of them used a phrase that amounted to, I just want things to get back to normal. I can't wait till things are more normal again. So it's like, I can't wait till they just turn the damn electric on the plates again. And I can accept that my fate is such that I'm going to experience this low-level electric shock. It's not going to be particularly pleasant. It's not killing me. I may never be fully able to realize myself or express myself or be creative again. I may not be able to have any control over my circumstances. And I continue to give in more and more and more to this mass order that's arising and give away my soul to some extent. But at least it's normal and it's comfortable. I know this. Much easier to deal with than the utter liberation of having to take responsibility and obligation for operating your life, including how do you handle exposure to danger? You know, it's like, I don't want there to be a beautiful mountain experience where there's not a railing that somebody put in so I can't fall off the edge. Mm. So imagine that. Imagine if every one of the Swiss Alps was properly railed so nobody could ever fall off the edge of the mountain, and how wonderful that would be for society. Yeah. Because now we can all explore the gender, you know, the joy and the wonder and the grandeur of the Alps with railings.
Oh yeah, but at the same time, so because I mean I'm you know, I've seen this, I've been surrounded by this my whole life, and in my own way struggled to kind of find a way through it, because it's so anti-life to me and the opposite of who I am. And even though it feels like the walls are closing in, it feels like we've forgotten everything about, you know, left-leaning totalitarian kind of hell. It's so recent in our history, and it seems like there's a whole bunch of people now who don't seem to know about what happens if you carry on down that direction. But I yet at the same time, so I'm kind of amazed at how stupid and how forgetful we are as a species, and how easy it is for us to erode education so quickly that people can't think critically anymore and just kind of swallow whole whatever they're given without processing it or seeing the subtlety in it, or, you know, and I've been, you know, lately people have been like labeling me as far right, which is is absurd. If anyone who's kind of spent any time with me in my life, to call me far right is beyond imagining. And yet that seems like a reasonable thing for some people to say when I talk about, say, freedom of speech. But what I was getting to was, do you think, because my understanding is, if we think about the sort of spiral of psychosocial development, it feels also to me like, and this could be an illusion, but I wonder what you think about this, that there are more people who have developed further on that spiral around now than there've ever been in human history.
Sure.
Am I imagining that?
No, I don't
So,
think so. I mean,
so
I
this
haven't gone out
kind of
and done
gives
the
me
work.
it's a weird situation where it feels like we're fucked and it's closing in and it's going to be the gulag. I'm going to be in the gulag soon because I'm going to be on the first fucking train, because they're just going to round up all the people that don't fit in or work for the machine, and away we go. And yet at the same time, it's like in the cellular structure of society and humanity, it feels like there are lots and lots of individual cells, i.e. people, who are opening up in ways that we haven't seen before. What do you make of that?
So again, let me try to speak to a lot of what you said, because you kind of walked through a large expanse there to some extent. And first of all, I would say that it's not that people are uneducated or have forgotten. It's that the system, this governing that's happening, is in collusion with the forces of what we can call corporatism, not capitalism. People don't understand the distinction between corporatism and capitalism. I don't want to go into the whole macroeconomic theory question, but there's a distinction here. So corporatism is in service of the corporation, not in service of the people through the access to resources and privatization that capitalism provides, and the ability to pull resources in to provide progress and growth. That's what capitalism speaks to. And I'm not saying it's the best system. I'm not a big fan of capitalism in many ways, but I'm much, much, much less of a fan of corporatism. So let's distinguish those two things. So you have the governing, and you have the corporating, and you have the mediating. And these three forces have combined. And we have to put into the old concept that gent here in the United States by the name of Dwight D. Eisenhower referred to as the military-industrial complex, and was warning about, in the same way that Thomas Jefferson and Madison in their day, when they formed the country of the United States, warned about government and said, you cannot allow government to continue. You must disrupt it on a regular basis. That was their concept. And here we are with these people who believe they are somehow speaking the words of the Enlightenment era, who don't get you have to disrupt government. You must break it down to its fundamental level over and over and over again, so it doesn't become this corrupt, rotting corpse that is giving life to fundamentally the maggots who eat upon it. And that's what I see in Washington, D.C., is a collection of maggots eating on the rotting corpse of a incredible, brilliant idea and experiment called the United States. And so, if that's too much for your listeners, I apologize. But in any case, the thing is that we move on from that. We see this trifold effect of those who are governing, those who are corporating, and those who are mediating. And they are all together building a narrative. And they're better than they've ever been at building a narrative. We have much, much more science of narrative, much, much more science of cognition, much, much more science of the psychological and psychic forces that drive people to act and behave the way they do. We understand the social dynamic structures in ways we never understood before, and what a social ontology looks like, and how to build and create and contain one, and how to notice for the disruptors of those ontologies so that we can interrupt the disruption. And the narrative has been designed brilliantly to do that over and over. And the idea of never using a crisis or letting it go to waste is that not only have they not let the crises go to waste, they've been able to manufacture crises that aren't there by creating a narrative of crisis. So we've been living for most of my lifetime and yours, Tim, in a constant narrative of crisis to crisis to crisis. They simply bridge the crises together, And when there isn't one, they'll simply manufacture one. right? So they'll tell us stories about things that may or may not be happening and blow them up to the proportion of crisis. So we have to become terrified of how, it's going to come into our home. And there's truly now the boogeyman under the bed, whether that boogeyman is the pandemic, or that boogeyman is Al Qaeda, or that boogeyman is the Muslim, or that boogeyman is the sex predator, or that you choose your boogeyman, right? The boogeyman is the collapse of the economy. The boogeyman is communism. The boogeyman is capitalism. There's always a boogeyman under the bed to get you, and will come out when you least expect it if you don't constantly keep yourself in a hyper state of tension, fear, and angst, so that you're super, sensitive, super aware. Aware of what? You're not lying in the tall grass between the birches, feeling the sun come down on your face, because God knows that's when the boogeyman's going to show up and get you unawares.
Yeah.
But it's the time in your life where you're most aware. I am alive. I'm part of this thing, man. I can feel it pulsing within me and from me. And the challenge is, if you take that out of the grass and you leave the birches behind, and you continue to pulse and radiate like that, the world will notice. And you will stand out, and you will be on that train to the gulag, because that's an unacceptable threat to the common social form of fit in and be good. I wrote a book about this. My book, Experience the Hero's Journey, was all about the idea of fitting in and being good. It's all about the idea that from the time we enter into the socialization process in our homes, and then further exacerbated in our schools, and even if we're not in schools, if we're homeschooled, in the learning process, we're being taught fit in and be good. Mm-hmm. These are the things that are important to learn. Whatever they may be, these are the important things. Do these things and not these other things. Fit in, be good. We need you to be a constructive, productive member of society. There's always someone to be served, and service is of the highest order. If I can simply be of service to my fellow man, to mankind, I must be a good human being, and the gates of heaven will open to me when I'm, finally moving on from this mortal coil. The bullshit is so well designed, and it's so innocuous, and it seems to make such good sense that my function should be of service. And we miss what it takes to be of service, which is, to some extent, giving ourselves up in the process. So the magic is to reincorporate the mythology of truth into ourselves. And I don't know what that truth is. I don't know that there is a mythology of truth I can point you to. What I mean by that is it's a conceptual form, almost like Plato's cave, if you will. The conceptual form is, there is something that is true of us innately, who we are. And that truth of our being can find resonance in the world around us, in our actions and in our relationships. And if we allow ourselves to gravitate to those actions and relationships where we are most naturally fulfilling this expression of being, what we truly most are innately as who we are, magic begins to appear around us. We begin to do things, and we acknowledge this. And only those who break through this layer and succeed, get the Nobel Prize, or get the Pulitzer Prize, or get the, whatever it may be. There's all the prizes in the world for the creative folks who defy basically the common conventions and break through the limits of these things we call literature and art and science and humanities. And we acknowledge them, we honor them, but we make sure we limit them to the very, 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 very few. And we make it very clear, they're in a special club and you're probably not in it.
Yeah. And if they get a bit too good at it, we usually kill them, right?
Mm-hmm. Did you ever see the old movie Rollerball?
Oh God, yeah, but years ago. I haven't seen it. I do remember it being amazing.
There was the original version of the movie with James Caan, which is the one I was referring to.
Yeah.
The second version, they truly screwed by reinterpreting it.
Right.
You don't want the new version to actually tell the story. Mm-hmm. The original version was, the corporations have now taken over the world. The government is the corporations. And they invent this sport, which ultimately nobody can win at. Ultimately, everybody is consumed by the sport and fails. And this one guy stands out, Jonathan, who's so good, he becomes an icon to people, and he begins to represent the possibility of exceeding the circumstance.
Yeah.
So the corporations begin to plot and change the rules of the sport over and over and over again to force Jonathan to fail, to ultimately, basically the end of the sport that they change the rules to is kind of death sport, right? Only one person can survive, right? And the last one standing. And they organize it so that Jonathan is going to be the individual who's got the biggest target on his back.
Yeah.
And the filmmakers of the original movie made it that Jonathan succeeds in a way. And it's the perennial story, it's the us against them story. It's the overlords who are trying to control and contain the masses for their own purposes and intentions. A friend of mine likes to refer to the oligarchs and plutocrats, right? But the point being that this idea is not new. You have to contain this wild man, wild woman spirit that will emerge if you let it, because it's dangerous to the overall, again, ability to contain the masses. The containment becomes threatened. The cage begins to loosen and rattle when the wild man, wild woman appears.
Yeah, I mean, again, this is what gives me faith in the ultimate benevolence, is that all the stories talk about this, and the odds are always absurdly against the hero succeeding, and the hero succeeds. So it's written into the code of who we are. This is what gets me up in the morning, because I know that I'm on the right side, even though the odds look ridiculously stacked against anything good happening. All the stories throughout all the cultures speak to this. And I wonder, and at this time where it does seem like we're reaching a kind of meta crisis, and maybe on the verge of either extinction or a leap to something like a humanity 2.0, that maybe all these mythologies and stories have been pointing at all along. And it kind of, that inspires me, because, touching on what you said, I really feel like the only thing we can do right now is to fully be who we are, find out what the fuck that is, and then do it as much as we can do it. Use everything in our power to present that to the world, because, as we all know, when you see somebody doing that, whoever it is and whatever sort of field of human endeavor they're doing it in, it instantly, and you want it for yourself. You love it. We admire those people because they just show us what it is to be true and to be fully who you are. And it's so compelling. And one tiny little piece of that shines so brightly when compared to the big mountain of shit that, the machine is offering. There's no competition, and everyone deeply in their hearts knows it when they see it, and that's a wonderful thing to think of, is that when you get a glimpse of that, and this is in all the great stories throughout time as well, when you see that little bit of truth and goodness, it's so clear and so true. I mean, how do we, what have you done personally, I guess, is the next question to kind of, I know from the influence you've had on me that you've definitely been someone who's presented your truth in that way. How are you kind of negotiating and navigating these times at this stage now in your life, having gone on your journey? And what can you sort of see? Can you see avenues or ways that we can somehow create more of this truth in individuals?
I think there's a whole bunch of things, right? So one of the things that I would like to say is that there is a compromise, a co-opting that has happened. And this co-opting is really the danger that I see in the world. I'll give you an example. I'm sure you're probably familiar at some level or another, I've heard at some level or another, of this young girl, Greta from Sweden, who's the climate, champion, right? Mm-hmm. Now, people see, she's been presented, let me use that term, as an icon of truth, believing her own truth and putting it out there and challenging the powers that be and being allowed in to the UN climate conference and given tremendous media coverage and these kinds of things. Well, here's the first thing, folks. if somebody's given entrance into the hallowed halls of the institutions and they haven't been taken out of prison first to get there, they are part of the system, not against the system. The system is using them. They are not opposing the system. She is not a voice of truth. She's not a heroine. She's a young girl who I think believes what she's been told about herself and how she's been presented to herself. But anybody who's paying attention realizes she is what we call in most other circumstances a shill. And it's a saddening to me of seeing this because they're basically using and allowing, her parents are allowing her to be used in that way by the system for its purposes. Now, I think she's incredibly sincere. I believe she absolutely holds these convictions and believes herself to have seen something, to be aware of something that the adults around her cannot see because they are just too steeped in and blah, 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 blah. But the reality is she's speaking exactly what those in power need to be speaking, to be hearing in this moment, right? I come back to the United States. In his first, whatever it is, 7 days in office, Joe Biden is writing sweeping reforms to environmental change to wipe out the damage that Donald Trump has done, right? So he's eliminating the possibility of the Keystone pipeline. Now, the elimination of the Keystone pipeline does not prevent the movement of oil from the Canadian shale fields through the United States to the Gulf of Mexico onto ships. That's not what it does. What it does is it prevents that oil from being moved through the pipeline to get there. Instead, it's going to be moved by truck and train. The potential damage of train derailment is thousands of times higher than the potential damage of the pipeline. It's just that the pipeline is way more visible when it happens because everybody can focus on it as they're there because it's static and they can go fix it. The train derailments come and go. They come and go. Everybody knows it happens. What can you do? Well, you could put a freaking pipeline in. That's what you could have done, right? So this illusion that he's for the environment is very dangerous. Now, if you want to make an argument and go, hey, listen, we cannot afford at all to transfer that oil from those shale fields through the United States because of the potential environmental damage it represents. That's a completely different conversation now. Now we can have a different conversation. What do we do? And what is the environmental damage that's caused from not having access to that oil? What will replace those energy needs, or will we simply give them up and submit that there will be thousands and millions and probably 1 billion people who will suffer and die because they don't have access to energy because of the world we've created? What do you do? So these questions are illusionary at the level they're being presented and absorbed. As I said, the narrative is very well manufactured and controlled. And we have to be very, very cautious. You ask, what am I doing? And what I'm doing is I'm being very cautious about hearing messages that on the surface make so much sense and are so clear and powerfully presented that I'm compelled to want to listen to them and agree with them because they do make sense in the way they're being presented. But when I scratch the surface, what I find is that beneath the mask or the makeup, there's some grotesque creature that resides there that is really presenting themselves as beauty and form of, youth and vitality. It's not what I'm getting. It's the wrong package, right? So I'm very cautious, number one, Tim, about what it is I allow into my head to stay there without careful examination and understanding of what it is I'm being presented with. And to some extent, I've absolutely, as I've gotten older, become more cynical about things. So I still believe absolutely and definitively the universe is ultimately benevolent. But it doesn't mean that every action and every act or every group of individuals or person that I encounter is benevolent and has good intention. So the thing that I eventually get to is I live in the space that I live in. I don't do all things. I sure as hell don't know all things. I know very little and fundamentally probably do very little in comparison to the, complexity and the enormity of what's present in what we can call humanity at large. But in this small space, I put my attention on these forms, what I call these mythic forms. And I try to understand how the myths that we live in relation to and inside of us and that we express externally are shaping and forming and guiding who we are, the experience we have, the lives that we live, right? And what I would say is what I found, I've been doing this 30 years, a little bit more actually, professionally. with people all around the world. I've been in, 35, 36 countries in the world presenting this material. In some form or another, it's been translated into about 15 different languages now, and different programs I've offered with different people. Hundreds of people that I've worked with professionally and trained, thousands that I've worked with to offer and present the material to. And what I find every single time, in every one of those instances I just described, we exist only in the space that we occupy with others. I do not exist here.
Mm.
I gave an example, again, one of those pretentious examples. I was defending a doctoral dissertation, my second doctoral dissertation. And in the process of doing that, the person who was interviewing me, the proctor of the exam, was asking me, a problem here, I observed, Mr. Riggio, and that is that you seem to have only one voice being expressed in the document you've handed me. So I read through it, and it's beguiling, in fact, but there's only a single voice there. And I almost went into a rage. And the rage that I went into was something like this. Are you kidding me? Just because you cannot see the voice of my grandmother, who lived to be 103, and I spent the entirety of my life around and with, or my aunts, my uncles, my father, my mother, my brothers, my cousins, my friends, because you cannot see these voices, it doesn't mean they're not there. How can I not have those voices within me? Now, I may only be speaking with my voice, my tongue, my words, but those voices are there. They're in those words. They shape the sounds in my head that you hear come from my mouth. And you don't have any way of knowing, because you did not know her when I'm speaking through my grandmother's voice. You don't know when my father is resonating in the sounds that I'm expressing to you. But all those voices exist. This is the myth that I am. I'm the myth of every experience I've had with every person who's influenced me and touched me in my life. The good, the bad, the ugly, the beautiful. All of that is present. I don't know how to share that with you in a way that could make sense to you, other than the ways I did, other than maybe to call out, by the way, this was something I may have heard from my grandmother when I was 3. And this is something my father instilled upon me when I was 10. And a friend of mine last week offered me this insight. So I simply present it as though it's mine, although I know it's never mine alone, because I can't exist in a field that is separate from all that I've experienced with all those people who have influenced me so. And that's what I think. That you ask me what I do about it. I allow myself to be transparent to the reality that I don't exist apart from you. That's what I do, man. That's the myth I'm living.
There's only the relationships. We only exist in the relationships we have with others. I mean, I guess there is one relationship that you have internally as well to add into that.
How? When were you ever alone? Did you not come from the womb of your mother?
No.
Was not the first heartbeat you heard hers?
Yeah, but I mean, when you are on your own and you're having a relationship with yourself in that moment, or there's some part of you that's having a relationship with some other part of you.
What's that other part of you? How do you know that's you? How can you distinguish the thing you're referring to as internally with yourself from internally with the conversation you had 10 years ago with somebody who meaningfully impressed an idea upon you?
Okay, yeah, I see what you mean. So it's this kind of a family of voices within you that you're having that relationship. Sure.
Yeah, and I don't mean literally in my head. I hear a family of voices. That's normally considered pathological disease. What I mean is that I recognize that as I consider my life, all of these connections, interactions, experiences are contained. They are who I know myself to be, right? And very literally, there are moments where, especially, as I got older, let's call it from the age of 35 or 30, maybe it was 40. I don't know exactly the moment in time where I became to realize this. I was literally expressing the voice, the sound, the tempo, the rhythm, the quality, and the words that had been impressed upon me earlier by someone else. I could hear it as it came out of my mouth, that it wasn't literally my own thoughts or voice that was being expressed, but something I had incorporated and absorbed and assimilated and integrated so deeply that it felt like me being myself. And in fact, you could argue that is me being myself, but it's also me having a relationship with that other.
And that goes back through the ancestral line. You know, this is kind of, it's one huge web of connection, really, isn't it? You know.
It's primordial.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
And within that, there is this sense of connection, and also, as you're saying, in those relationships, and maybe it's especially useful to kind of point to those relationships where it's difficult, where somebody is calling you far right. You know, these are aspects of us too, where that conflict is happening.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and all the triggering that's going on both sides, and I sort of feel. I mean, I'm interested to sort of hear how you think the technology is affecting and impacting this, because it seems like social media has just kind of completely detonated in society now, and is having all kinds of effects that we're not even yet seeing what they are, but
Mm-hmm.
it's clearly profoundly fucking with us, you know. I mean,
Well,
what's your experience of that, and how that's getting into our way of relating, you know?
what I was going to say is, well, this, me and you, is an example, right? So we're having this conversation, and it's lovely that we can. So there's the big, huge upside, because were it not for this, we wouldn't be having the conversation, at least not right now.
Yeah.
But is this conversation the same one that we would be having if we were sitting together and I could smell your breath and you could smell mine, and we could, experience the warmth or coolness of the room in simultaneity? These things change us. We're having a different conversation, I would argue, than the one we would have. So here's what I'm going to say. I'm going to try to give a very 30,000-foot level conversation about what you asked, and that is, I think what technology does is it opens up vast wonders of a virtual experience that becomes available to us. This being virtual. You and I right now are in virtual space.
Yeah.
We're not in the same space. There's a space that contains us both, but it doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's a virtual space. And in that virtual space, there is no body. It's a disembodied space. Sitting here in this chair, I have an embodied experience, but it's not of you in any way being here with me. I can only have the virtual experience of you in that disembodied space for all kinds of reasons. We can talk about how and why and what that, and all the distinctions of that. And then there's, the possibility, let's say that there was a magical kind of technological revolution in advance, where whenever we did this, we wore bodysuits that transferred our body experiences and expressions to the other person who was also wearing a bodysuit. So it would generate some of those pheromones, and it would generate some of the, if I reached out to touch your arm, you would feel the touch on your arm through the suit. Let's say that even that were possible. I would still argue that that experience continues to be virtual and disembodied, because the experience of another being as an embodied being present to you is not wearing a suit that's creating sensations of an embodied being present to you, right? So there's these distinctions. So I come back to my body. Technology removes me from my body. As much as I enjoy it and use it and like it, and I'm profoundly amazed by it, and I recognize that the advantages of having these tools available to me, and I use them all the time, and I love using them, expressing myself and putting myself out into the world through them, which is largely what I do with them. I also find that they disembody me if I allow them to. Mm-hmm. So I trick me into remaining embodied, and that is by often taking my devices to places where I can't help but to be embodied, to the beach, out into the sun, into nature. I often take my things into social spaces. So I think that's one of the reasons why we've seen the explosion of cafes and coffee shops, is that people want to be present while they're on the computer to this mass of life that surrounds them. And of course, we can't do that now because there is lockdown and we've been shut down. Don't get too close to people. It might open you up again to the fact that you have a body and you actually have an expression to be had. So if I'm again spewing conspiracy theory agendas to ignore me, but the answer is I come back to this and I think about, okay, I got this shoulder, right? And where does this shoulder come from? You were talking about ancestral. Well, of course, all my ancestors had a shoulder very similar to this one in terms of the way the joint works. And I have a cat, you know, and I look at my cat's shoulder, and my cat's shoulder is nothing like this shoulder. It cannot do what this shoulder does. And maybe I can't do some of the things my cat shoulders does, but it's not a human shoulder. And then I look through and I go, well, is there any other shoulder in the world that's more similar to mine than my cat's? And I look at some of the primates. And primates have shoulders that are much more similar to mine, right? I look especially at chimpanzees. They can do this thing, which is marvelous, which a human shoulder can do, called throwing, right? So we can move our arms in a way where we can throw an object. You know, cats and dogs can't throw objects. They can't make that motion, right? And so there's not just the sensation of connection to you as human in my body, but there's a recognition of the evolution of life in my body. Where does it come from? Like, I do share all these parts with my cat. My cat also has eyes and ears and a tongue. My cat has legs and it has a spine. And I share these things with my cat. They're different, but I look back and I go, what else has a spine and legs and ears and tongue and eyes? And I go back and go, okay, there's all these other creatures that have those things. And then there's some creatures that have some of those things, but not others of those things. But they have other things that we don't have, like fins and gills, right? And the awareness of a body and what it means to have this body, to be in this form, and to be in the world and experience the world through this embodiment of what it is to be human, changes the experience of what you believe to be real. You recognize the reality that you embody is a human reality. And it's not the same reality that your cat experiences. Your cat moves through a different reality than you do, right? A different sense of dimension and verticality, a different sense of light and dark, a different sense of warmth and cold. Their experience of reality is not your experience of reality. It's very, very different. And then it allows me to realize that you, Tim, experience reality in a way that's probably not as different as my cat's experience to mine, different enough that you are exposed to and experience things in reality that I can't know or have any sense of, except if I allow myself to open myself to you. And then you can feed into me, into my body, literally, what it is my body can't know without you, right? Now, we extend this to the ultimate degree when we begin to get intimate. Now, intimacy for me, it includes all the way up to, you know, sexual union. I mean, that is about as intimate as I can imagine bodies getting. But there's also intimacies that precede that, that allow me to know other bodies as well. Touching, you know, intimate massage, sexual massage is a level beneath the union, but incredibly intimate, incredibly connected, and knowing the other body, where it's soft, where it's hard, how it fits together, and what happens when you touch it here versus there, and the stimulations that your body feels when you do. And then I can back off again, and I can go to a different level of contact with someone, and I can experience all these things, hugging my children, which gives me a sense of a body in a different way, and the response they have to me, the way that my children's body, I remember when they were young, when I would hug them, would soften. They would melt into me a little bit because something had shifted for them. And I'm guessing, at least in part, it was, you know, this falling back to the lower levels. Like, now I am safe, I am secure. At least for this moment, all is well with the universe. Right? And I absorbed some of that from them. Like, that's what I got from them. And there was now a resonance between us. As long as we're like this, we're safe, we're okay. How are we okay? Could a bomb still fall on our shelter and take us out? Yes. But we, you and I, in relationship, we're okay. This relationship is intact. It's okay in this moment. And therefore, I know I am. So I think this is the big human mystery, is our desire endlessly to know we are. And the fear that's put into us that we may never be, that we may never have been, is the great fear. The fear that we will not be at some point is not nearly as terrifying as the fear that we never got to be in the first place. So I think the great gift of what it is to be human, and, you know, I'm kind of heading to a natural teleological pull, is the desire to know ourselves to be fully present to ourselves being who we are. And this is my life's work. I mean, you know my work to some extent. And I'm endlessly trying to provoke people into having the experience, if it's even just for a fleeting instant, that they exist, and somehow that existence matters. It counts in some unique and definitively individualistic way, even if it in fact is simply the expression and projection of a vast consciousness which is undifferentiated.
Yeah. Yeah, all this and the talk of this embodiment brings something up for me, which is where I'm being called at the moment. Or I feel like I've reached the kind of point in my journey where I've had a very long, slow apprenticeship that's maybe lasted a little bit longer than it was supposed to. Or not. I don't know. For me, it seems like this is how long it took. But I feel like I'm at this kind of pivot point now. And there are two aspects. There is this universe now, this virtual space, which I can see is important. And that's part of what I'm doing with these conversations is I know I need to engage in this space because it's a very powerful tool as well. And it means I can have these kind of connections like we're having now, which I couldn't have if I was just doing in a local sense, in a Met sense. But at the same time, I have this incredible relationship with the land here where I live. And it's taught me in my kind of period of retreat from the world, if you like, of not taking on that sort of responsibility of being in the world. I've unwittingly been on this whole journey of learning about the land and connection with what I call the greater body, which is actually the living landscape that is an inseparable part of our body actually. And all that I've learned in that, and all that I'm seeing culturally, or a large part of what I'm seeing culturally, is we have disconnected from the physical land as well as disconnecting from our body. And that's in a large part, that's why we've been able to completely fuck up the environment. Because if you have a really strong, loving relationship with the place where you live, the last thing you could ever do would be harm it or kill off life forms and make it unstable. Because all you want to do is give to it and nurture it because you feel how much it nurtures you. It's this very effortless, reciprocal relationship. And I've got such a sense of how important that is and how I would now like to share that experience that I've had through getting back into my own body, which I was very much distanced from, even just from the beginning because of the way I was made. I wasn't quite in touch with my body. Some people are very physically intelligent from the off, and they're good at sports and this and that. I was emotionally very present but off in my imagination. So I've kind of learned about the body and got back into the body, and through that, and in a way, thinking about those early experiences I talked about, they were very embodied experiences. So maybe I've always been called through the body to this thing beyond, this greater than self thing, which I really feel strongly is in the land, as well as a kind of more mysterious spiritual dimension, perhaps. But I'm really feeling that enabling others to have an experience of connection with the land is where I'm being pulled. And I want to have this kind of very localized side to my life that's happening in the physical realm on the land that marries with this virtual, globally connected realm where ideas can be shared. And the two sort of feel, there's a real harmony between them that I'm feeling, that somehow feels more like who I really am, is a bringing together of this imaginative realm, which in a way this is what this is, with the very physical, local, real realm. Yeah. that's what your conversation, because you always bring it back to the body, you know, and your influence on me has really helped me on my journey back into my body. And yeah, and my kind of getting into Aikido and the martial arts journey, which I know you've also, you've been on your whole, you've done lots of martial arts, am I right, in your time?
So I was 11 years old, and I'm an old man now.
So just out of interest, what are you practicing anything right now?
There was an art that I began about 8 years ago now. 8 or 9, and it was at the art that I entered into was called Guided Chaos, and the original name was The Way of the Ghost Fist, and it was formed by an American gent by the name of John Perkins, and they changed the name when they wrote a book called Attack Proof to Guided Chaos, because the editors and the publishers thought it was a better way to present the material. And what John basically, his premise is that violence is chaotic. You can't do anything except accept the chaos and enter into it. And then you can guide the chaos to an outcome, just guided chaos, right? And his movements are incredibly natural and simple and profound. John moves with people in a way I've never experienced anybody moving before. And so I stayed with that and learned it. And it's almost indescribable compared to any other martial art, because you want to say it's formless, but of course there's always form inside of the formless as well. So it's the purest martial art I've ever experienced, because there is nothing to learn except how to move in relation to where another person is moving their body with a martial intention, with an intention for combat, you could call it. And then his senior master instructor at the time was a gent named Al Ridenour, and Al broke off recently, last year or so, and formed his own art. It's the same art for all intent and purpose. Some of the thinking about it, some of the ways he expresses it is unique and different, but it's taken on a new name that he now refers to as Warrior Flow. So I am a senior master instructor of Warrior Flow. And I've, been doing this stuff for a long time now. And I love it. I mean, I love the movement. I love the experience of it. I love being able to interact with another human being in a way where we're both playing at anticipating where we're going together and how we're getting there, and using all the tools of embodiment to arrive. So yeah, that's what I'm doing these days. And, a long list of training that, wrestling, boxing, all kinds of other martial arts that come out of the Orient and some out of Europe that I studied and played with over the years.
But this one, because this is fascinating to me, because it sounds like it's like a next level martial art. In a similar way, I felt like Aikido had kind of gone to a place somewhere else that the other martial arts out of that tradition hadn't gone before. But this that you're talking about, it sounds like, because it's beyond all forms, therefore it's able to engage with anything.
That's
it seems like a supreme,
pointing to chaos.
Yeah, I mean, a supreme way of being present, basically. I mean, a kind of ultimate form of meditation that's totally engaged with the physical world, because a violent attack that truly is a violent attack that is totally chaotic. Because,
right.
As we all know, real fights are not like the ones you see in the dojo or, in the films. They're messy, they're fucking unpredictable, and, they're terrifying. So there's all of that going on, This is fascinating. So is this something that are you teaching a class in Florida then, or is there?
Well, I was working with Al and teaching alongside him when I was up in New Jersey and Pennsylvania. We were doing some things, and at some point we'll do some stuff down here in Florida. But I'm kind of waiting for now the whole COVID effect to pass us by a little bit more, so we can be more free to invite people in and get them in to do things. Also just being cognizant of the potential risk as well, and realizing that is there. But the gen that I mentioned who started, this guy John Perkins, who really is quite a brilliant individual in his way. I referred to him once in an article I wrote about guided chaos at the time as the Einstein of movement. And really, the reason I use that terminology, it was of course to express the idea of the brilliance of what he brought to what he did, but it was literally the entendre, the double entendre of the relativity question. Because this art is all steeped in the presence of relativity, that you have to act in relation to. It doesn't work. There is no art here in the way that John developed it, except to respond to another person's movement. That is the art.
It only exists in the context of a relationship. It cannot exist any other way, because that's what creates it, is the other person bringing whatever they bring.
Right. And the other thing that I love about the art, which is difficult for people, is it is a combat martial art. And therefore its intention is that, the way that I would refer to it myself, I'll just give my own expression. This is not coming necessarily from Al or from John, but I think they would agree with me. And Al in particular uses this phrase of ruthless intent, meaning if you get to the point where you're going to engage with someone seriously, you're going to defend yourself, you must do so with ruthless intent. And so my idea is we're not play fighting, we're not in a dojo, we're not training, we're not, having something. If you're truly engaged with me in a fight, in that moment, my mindset is minimally to disable you. And by disable you, I mean hurt you bad enough that you cannot move. Mm-hmm. That's my minimum intention. I'm probably thinking about killing you. Mm-hmm. And the reason is because before I lifted my hands, I have done everything in my capacity, every possible way I could not to engage you.
Yeah.
I've tried to walk away. I've tried to defend myself so I don't have to go into a fighting, position. I've given you everything I have in terms of my material goods, my watch, my wallet, whatever it may be that you're seeking. I've tried to escape, and I've done everything I could. And now you put me into a situation where I'm a rat in a corner, and now I have no choice but to come out with teeth and claws, and you're going to get everything I have. I'm not holding back. I'm not building an escalating force. It goes from zero to nuclear warhead.
Yeah.
There was a question I was asked, I think that I trained dogs at one point.
Yeah.
I love training dogs. And most of the dogs I was training was with a partner, and we were training them for very highly placed protection purposes. And it was fascinating. I mean, the level of intensity there is just awesome. It's just that embodiment again, right? And the dogs are intense. And people go, well, what kind of dog? And they would go, German Shepherd, Doberman Pinscher, what kind of dog? And I would go, well, pretty much the only dogs we trained, because of the application that we were putting them into, were pit bulls.
Right.
And they go, why pit bulls? And I would go, aren't they dangerous? And I go, they have teeth. If they bite you, they're dangerous. But I had one around my 2-year-old when, and he was actually, my dog came to the house before my son was born. So, I had this dog the whole time my son was growing up, and they played together. And one of the stories I tell, just to give you the pre-story, is my dog's totally trained. He's fully attack trained. I do demonstrations with him. He is 65 pounds. He is pure muscle. His bite force is thousands of pounds, literally. You're just talking a ballistic dog, right? And I hear from the other room, I'm living in a house at the time in New Jersey, and I hear this whimpering, which my dog never does, right? So there's something wrong. He's hurt. Like, this is the sound of a hurt dog. What's going on? I go in the other room, and I mentioned my son was 2 years old. And this is the story that comes to mind, why I always refer to the 2-year-old thing, is he's watching television. My son's watching television. And the dog's laying down, and my son has his head on the dog's belly, basically, as a pillow. But the dog isn't properly positioned from where my son wants him. So he literally has a testicle in each hand and is dragging the dog into position. Now, this is a dog that would, it wouldn't even be a flicker of the capacity to completely, just kill him, literally kill him, devour him if you want it, right? Mm-hmm. And instead, he's like calling out to me, you got to help, Dad. I mean, I need some help here because this is not fun, And that's who this dog was. So was he dangerous? He was absolutely dangerous. He was as dangerous as this. When people ask me about the level of protection work, I would say Doberman Pinschers are like having a relatively moderately powered rifle in the house, like a 22 caliber rifle.
Mm-hmm.
Having a German Shepherd is like pulling back the cock, on a shotgun. You're going to extend some serious force. A German Shepherd's a much more dangerous dog in terms of capacity. German Shepherd, Rottweiler in the same range, I would say. Like compared to a Doberman, 22 versus shotgun with buckshot. Okay. Compared to a German Shepherd or a Rottweiler, a pit bull is a nuclear device. It doesn't go up to Gatling gun or, AK. It's a nuclear device. It is so much more intense. The speed, the intensity and drive of the dog mentally, the bite force of the dog, the physicality and agility and movement of the dog, it's in another domain completely. You cannot compare the animals. They're just not comparable. I would compare a pit bull attack closer to a large feline attack like a mountain lion than I would to another dog. That's the distinction of difference.
And they have, am I right in thinking that they have that kind of, once they're started and they're in, nothing will stop them. They will do it to the death.
Phrase. You got to remember, pit bulls, the word pit is the fighting pit.
Yeah.
And they were trained to be what they call dead game. Dead game was these old timers 100, 200 years ago were fighting these dogs, and there was a betting thing. It was a high level gambling, high stakes gambling stuff, right? And it was cruel. My world, your world, cruel. But to these guys, these were their, to some extent, means of livelihood and reputation. So if a dog went into the fighting pit and it wasn't dead game, meaning it would not give up its life before it would stop the fight, they would cull the dog. They would kill the dog. Dog would never have puppies.
Yeah.
So only those dogs that would literally fight to the death were bred, right? And now you had generation after generation after generation after, you got these dead game dogs. However, this is what people don't understand about that. That sounds really hard and cruel, and it is very hard and cruel. And this is an interesting point, I think, to the conversation we're having about softening of the species, our species.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing they couldn't have a dog that was that dangerous do was attack them. Right. So even when the dog was in full-blown attack in the pit, attacking another dog, if they came up to that dog and grabbed its collar to separate them, if the dog turned around and went, manic on them and could not recognize the distinction between what's out there that I'm attacking and what's behind me that's mine, the dog also got culled.
Yeah.
You got these dead game dogs that are so stable that when you go to control them, you have absolute control.
Right.
They cannot be provoked into dangerous attack when they're in an environment where the environment is controlled and they haven't been given a signal or a reason to attack. So there would be times when I was doing these demonstrations that I would set up these demonstrations where there would be an attacker, right, that would come to, present himself. And the person would be properly protected. They would have a protection equipment on. But my dog had to sit at my side, off leash, knowing that I was going to send him at some point after this attacker, as the attacker was provoking him, coming into us, yelling, all kinds of stuff. And only when I gave the signal would he leave that sitting position and do the attack.
Right.
So much so, you could come to the point where you could come up and pretty much whack him on the nose, and he would look to me and go, "Can I bite him now?" Right. So dead game and dead control, dead emotional, we call stability. Control's really the wrong word. I'm giving it to you because it's more common for people, but it's like an emotional stability. It's this ability to never give up. They do not back off. They will not relent, but they are absolutely stable. So when they have an owner or a master that is in control of them in the sense that they respect that relationship enough, when that person in essence says, "Turn it off," it's off like a switch. That's the amazing thing, right?
So
and
that's kind of, that's the...
they're that dead game. Only because they're that dead game can they turn it on and off like that. There's just no fear. There's no fear in the dog. The dog's not attacking because it's afraid. It's attacking to some extent, crazy as it may sound, because it's fun. It enjoys the engagement. As a boxer, I know this sounds crazy, but I liked getting hit. I liked knowing what the other guy could put out. Right. And I liked knowing I could take it.
Mm.
And when I went in the ring, I had this attitude: if you get in the boxing ring with me, I'm going to hurt you as soon and as much as I can. I want to knock you out. I want to lay the hardest, strongest punch on you you've ever experienced. If I break your jaw, I'm perfectly happy with that because you chose to step into the ring with me.
Mm.
If I meet you at the coffee shop, we're having dinner together, I see you walking down the street, I'm never going to attack you. There's no reason for me to. Why would I? If you threaten me on the street, I don't need to raise my hands to you. I know who I am. I have nothing to prove. I know what I'm like in the ring.
Mm.
And I was a tough, nasty bastard.
Mm.
But outside, I just got no reason to get aggravated. I'm chilled. And I can be that chilled because you're going to have a very hard time threatening me. If I can walk away, I'm walking away. I've got no ego in this.
Mm.
You get what I'm saying? So the dog has the same kind of thing. Now you have a bunch of people in the world, and all they are unexpressed, undeveloped, anxious, burgeoning egos that constantly have to spew their bile out into the world because they have no sense of themselves and they don't know if they can take it. And they don't know if they do get punched in the face, if they can get back up again.
Mm.
I've been punched in the face and my knees have buckled and I know that I stood again. I've licked my wounds. I went home. I changed the shirt from the bloody one to a clean one. And here I am having the conversation with you.
Mm.
You're going to have a very hard time threatening me, whether it's with COVID or whether it's with your governmental regulations or whether it's with you threatening me on the street or saying horrible things about the girl that I'm with. I'm not going to be threatened, but there will be a line you cannot cross, and God help you if you cross it. May the gods, the old ones, the new ones, and the ones that haven't been created yet be with you, because the wrath of hell will be leashed. It will be unleashed, my friend.
Yeah, so it's that spectrum of being alive and being full that I hear when you're talking, and all the responsibility that comes with that. Because I know, knowing you as much as I do, when you're talking like this, you're being deadly serious about those things you're saying, and to me that kind of, and it also touches on that whole side of us embracing and understanding and integrating that wildness, that kind of the violence that is in us, physically, that we have in potential, but it's integrating is the right word, because you're not denying it or pushing it away. You are harnessing it and putting in its proper place for someone who is fully taking responsibility for themselves and wanting, to live or live from a place of love at the same time, but having that capacity. And there's no paradox in that for me. I can totally see what you're describing. And to me, that seems like a full expression of being alive.
I agree.
Is all of that. And my, and I'm not in this particular art form you're talking about is fascinating to me. And if there was something like that going on here, I'd be for sure interested in going along to it, because I certainly like this idea of
there's a Jen who teaches it in Slough.
Oh, really? Right. Okay. Oh,
Put you in
maybe
touch.
it'd just be nice to go and have an experience of it, actually, to see. So somebody you would say is doing it well enough
Good.
for it to be worthwhile.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the thing, that I like to say, because people hear me speak this way and they go, what an arrogant asshole. When I say this stuff, I'm not suggesting that, do I think that I am the baddest ass on the planet, that I'm, undefeatable in any way. What I'm saying is, I'm telling you, if it came to that, Tim, I'm going to unleash the wrath of hell upon you. I may die in the process. You may be that much better than me that you ended quickly, but a piece of you will come back to hell with me. That's what I mean by that comment. I don't think I win every time, but I think there will be a cost to you winning. And for most people on the planet, when they know there's really going to be a cost to something that they don't need, they're not going to pay the price. They'll find somewhere else to go instead of to me or to the people that I care about and love and protect and want to be with, right? So there's that aspect of it. And it's that ability to show that iron, that steel of commitment, that's the ruthless intent that Al refers to. I am prepared in this moment. If you cross that line, we will either one of us will go to hell or both of us will go to hell together, but you're not going back if I'm the one who loses with all the pieces you currently have intact. I'm taking something with me. Mm-hmm. That's the projection, right? And usually for any sane human being, that's enough. They get it, you know? There's, again, talk about the stories. There's 100 samurai stories about where, you know, the samurai comes in and will kill the tailor. But in that moment, the tailor's conviction is so absolute that he's going to die, that he's met this other samurai who told him the only thing you can do is swing with all your might the single time you'll have a chance. And maybe that will be enough. And the samurai sees it and goes, I don't need this, and walks away, right? So these stories are in the world of combat, in the world of martial arts. They exist over and over and over again. They're told and told and retold. On the other hand, I go to visit a friend of mine, and he has two young boys. And the older of his two boys at the time was probably, I'm going to guess, Charles was 6 or 7. And he was, you know, with new people that he did not know, very shy kid, mm-hmm. right? But there was like a kind of excitement to like engage. You could see that too. So he'd kind of move forward. But if you took even a step towards him or looked at him, he'd run away because he didn't know how to do it. He didn't have the social skills yet. He was building them. And so the first time I come to their house and I see Charles after he had been born, I'd seen him when he was a little baby. Obviously, he had no memory of me. Came in and Charles does this. He kind of runs up and then sees me, and I look at him. And as soon as I look at him, he runs away and he dives under the pillows. Now, I have not talked to his father, who's my friend, about this and how Charles is prior to coming to the house. And he knows I'm not going to do anything horrible. But I immediately run over to the couch, and Charles is now on the couch, and he's hiding under a single pillow. And the couch probably has 15 pillows on it. So I get all these other pillows, and I cover Charles with the pillows. And I go to the furthest point. It's a sectional couch, so it's like an L shape. And I go to the furthest point away from where he is. And I sit there. And Charles pops his head up from under the pillows. And he looks at me, and I look at him, and I look away. And he dives under the pillows because I looked at him. And this goes on 3-4 times. By about the 4th or 5th time he's done this, Charles is now on my lap telling me about his toy trucks. And his father's looking at me like, what the hell are you? Like some child whisperer or something? My son doesn't go to anyone. He doesn't go to his aunts and uncles. Like, how did you get him to do that? And my answer was really simple. I just let him lead. I went to his world, right? He's 6 years old, or maybe he was 4 even. I don't even remember. But he's, not capable of coming into my world. I can't say, well, come on, son, shake my hand. That's absurd. But that's what adults do to kids. Like they go, come to my world, meet me where I am. Or they try to enter into the kid's world as an adult.
Yeah. Right? Or in a sort of fake way that adults do it. Yeah.
Let's play trucky.
Yeah.
So I simply continued being an adult, went into the space that he was in, but invited him to come into a space we could share, which was neither his nor mine, but we could create together, right? So again, I would argue that same idea. I would say the reason that this young boy was sitting on my lap and we were having fun, he was talking to me, his father was so amazed. In my presence, he knew this is someone who's secure in themselves. I don't have to be afraid of him. He doesn't want anything from me, right? Same way, if you meet me on the street, I neither want to fight with you nor not fight with you. I don't want to defeat you, and I don't want to be defeated by you. I stand ultimately as neutral ground as I can, but with an invitation to enter into something and create something. And by the way, if what we create is a massive encounter that ends in violence, I'm cool with that, man. That's creation. If what we create is a brilliant piece of art together, I'm cool with that too, man. I'll jump into a cappella with you, whatever you want, wherever you want to go, babe. I'll enter into the space with you of creation, because that's what it's about for me. That's how I want to be and who I want to be in the world. And I don't know how much time I have. This may be the one. This may be it, man. I may hang up on you, and this is the last thing people ever hear from Joseph Riggio. I don't know. So let's create something wonderful.
Yeah.
Let's leave something behind that's worth having done.
Yeah, and for me, what that brings up as a kind of a really obvious thing is it speaks to freedom, because the freedom, that's freedom for me, is that it's the full range of human experience and the full range of responsibility that that entails. And with all the challenges that that presents, that's the world I would like to live in. You know, I don't want to live in these little narrow canyons that are being set up for us. You know, I feel that such a strong impulse in me is true freedom. You know, to go to those weird, dark, strange places, places where you're out of your depth, places that you don't know what's going on, but for those places to be there, and as a culture, for us to make a container that allows that to happen, you know, that that somehow, yeah, that can facilitate us having any experience that a human could have in a
Mhm.
way that we can still function as a society or as a culture. I
Sure.
feel like that's what we need to be looking towards now, is how do we have a human culture that takes care of everyone and everything, and lives in harmony with the planet and fully allows us to express what it is to be human in all its dark and light, and we can kind of journey into that. The richness of that is the world I would like to see.
Well, I think what you're describing, I'll go back to my roots and see if I can kind of bring us to a natural wrapping and conclusion of what we've been talking about. And that is, my kind of a fascination has been to discover the story that I'm living and to engage with other people and helping them to discover the stories they're living. And what I found over these many, many years of doing this is that some of the most interesting stories are the ones that haven't been told yet, that haven't been yet written. And I think the story you're describing is the one we're trying to write right now. So while we can go to the old stories and we can find some fragments that we can incorporate into the new story that will be helpful to us, and we may even find that we're retelling a story that's been told 1,000 or 10,000 times with new words, we still have to create the story and tell it in the way that we need it to be told today so that it can be heard in the way that it needs to be heard today. And so my life's mission, my work and the work I do with people is in a way to one at a time open them up to hearing that unspoken whispering on the wind of the story that's yet to be told. So what I would say to you is the same thing. If your ultimate sense of desire is to enter into the field of pure possibility and to go into the space where there's only freedom that you experience and feel and to express it in a fully realized way, you're going to have to go to what isn't yet and that you bring into being. You're not going to find it out there.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to bring it to what's out there. And therefore, you have to go to somewhere where it's not yet and discover it. And remember, there's a story I tell that is apocryphal. And the story is, Beethoven is living in this house and he's living in an apartment above this kid who winds up being a writer and a journalist below him when the kid's young. And Beethoven had a habit, as it's understood, of cutting off the legs or having the legs of his pianos taken off so he could lay the piano on the floor and he could play the piano on the floor so he could feel the vibrations because he was profoundly deaf.
Mm-hmm.
And so this kid at one point says that he asks Beethoven this question, which is, how do you write the music? Where do you, how do you create the music that you're writing? And he goes, I don't. He goes, I go to where the music is and I listen. Then I bring back to you what I can. And my profoundest regret is how much I forget in the journey.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll all have a bit of profound regret if we allow ourselves to go to those places where we begin listening to the stories that haven't been told and how little of them we can bring back to share with others. But for the other who hears a story that hasn't been told yet, it will be like igniting a fire that's in extinguishable.
Yeah.
So I think that's our task, is to be with others in such ways that we become that fire stick. And the only way to get the fire stick is we have to go and steal it from the gods.
Wow, beautiful, Joe. What a great place to wind it up. I feel that deeply. Yeah, and here's to the courage that's needed to go and steal it from the gods, but everyone has it in their heart somewhere, or it's waiting to be discovered. Wow. Well, thank you so much for that. That was a great journey, as I knew it would be. But thanks for sparing some time to do it.
For sure, sure. And the Buckminster Fuller thing is that we can never say it all, so we've said enough.
Cool. All right, Joe. Well, take care.
Cheers, my
So
friend.
your love to you and yours, and hopefully we'll do this again sometime soon.
Sure. Look
Oh,
at even
hey,
the cat knows again.
Cat's just waved
That's
goodbye.
Robbie.
All right.